إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله قال تعالى في كتاب الكريم أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. We praise Allah for all the blessings we have in this life. We praise Allah for what we have been given and what we haven't, what we have acknowledged and what we have not acknowledged. For the opportunities we have, for our health, for our wealth, for our families that we have, and for the blessing of guiding us upon being believers, being Muslims. And we ask Allah to send His blessings, to send His salutations upon the Prophet Muhammad, our Master Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, peace and blessings be upon him, upon the pious predecessors of our time, peace and blessings be upon them. 55 years ago, a tragedy happened in the US. At the time, 55 years ago, when the current situation of the society was similar to what we could say apartheid, what was happening in South Africa, what was happening in Palestine, Palestine. The civil rights movement was hot in the 60s. And racial tension was at the height at that moment. And with 55 years ago happening is a day particular to someone that goes into the spectrum of what we know as one of the most influential people in the US, especially being black and also being Muslim as well. Right? At that time was the Shahada, or the martyrdom of Malcolm X. We go back into Malcolm X, or his other name as well, Malik al-Shabazz. Right? May God be pleased with him. And we see what is the significance of him being a part of what his ideals were and his movement was to the Muslim. Right? To seeing how he was pivotal in black history. And we think of, especially in the calendar that we're in right now, the month that we're in, when it's recognized as Black History Month, it's very critical to understand what these leaders have put forth in American society for today, for us, especially as our status as being Muslims in today's world. We see how the black plight of what we know of the black American and their roots coming from the slave ship, right? The slave ship, and it's saying from research from about 20% to 40%, or even 60% of the Africans that were captured and enslaved into the US or the Americas were of Muslim descent, meaning that they had that Muslim heritage of them. We have the recurring narrations and recurring narratives of, for example, Ayyub Sulaiman, the fortunate slave. We have Yaro Mamot. We have Omar ibn Sa'id. And their legacy goes all the way to Muhammad Ali, for example, and including Malcolm X. There's that history to say that Muslims in these lands are not strangers, right? As in contrast to the sentiment that we might see today, right? In being Muslim in 21st century America. What does that mean? And when we think about Black History Month and its significance with Muslims, it's interesting to see how history in Indonesian, you say sejarah, right? Sejarah, in where it stems linguistically from the language perspective, comes from the Arabic word shajara. And shajara, what is shajara? What is shajara? Shajara is a tree. What does sejarah, history, have to do with a tree? When you look in the Quran, there's an ayah, أَلَمْ تَرَ كَيْفَ ضَرَبَ اللَّهُ مَثَلًا كَلِمَةً طَيِّبَةً كَشَجَرَةٍ طَيِّبَةٍ أَصْلُهَا فِي الْأَرْضِ وَفَرْعُهَا فِي السَّمَاءِ. This ayah talks about a tree where the roots, أَصْلُهَا فِي الْأَرْضِ وَفَرْعُهَا فِي السَّمَاءِ, that the roots are deeply entrenched in the earth, and the branches of it are far and high and towering. There's a narration of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ where he says that, paraphrasing, that the Muslim is like a palm tree. What's the reason behind that? The palm tree has its roots entrenched and deeply entrenched, meaning the way we see our beliefs, the way we have our convictions, how it's towering upwards, and how the leaves give shade and they bear fruit, as to how the Muslim should be a beacon of light, a beacon of influence, of good influence for the people around us. Right? And so when we see the roots, and we look back to our roots, and see the roots of what America has in its history of slavery, its history of the development of America itself. We see some narrations going back to where it's been recorded that people, or that of the past during the times of slavery, that other people would hear in the markets or in the streets, and they would see a Mohammedan that was known to sing and praise the praises of the Lord and the Prophet ﷺ, meaning there were phrases of praises. When you say Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, Allahu Akbar, when you sing those praises, when you say the salawat, Allahumma salli wa sallim wa barik ala Muhammad, that was heard from way back. Right? Not even just our time, 21st century, but during the times of when struggle was there. Right? And just going back and reaching back to the history of what we have, in this society that we have, we'll share some few things about the legacy of what Malcolm X has, for a recap, for those that don't know and for those that do know, to remind us that we have these people that were influential and that gave an inspiration for us all, inshallah, in the society that we live in today. And so, one lesson that we can learn from the life and times of Malcolm X that we know is that during his time when the blacks and other races were of that racial tension, when they were discriminated in that sense, we see to a small occurrence of when Malcolm, when he was a young boy in school, when he was asked by his teacher, what do you want to be when you grow up, right? And then he said he wanted to be a lawyer. But then at that time, there were, being a black person and being of that status of being a lawyer was unheard of. And so the teacher discouraged Malcolm, and which put him into a spiraling downfall into the phases of what Malcolm X was. And during his time in prison, we see the phases of Malcolm, Detroit Red, Malcolm Little, to Malcolm X, to Malik al-Shabazz, right? To Umawale, especially Umawale the Yoruba, for his name being the son that came home, meaning when he visited Africa itself, right, after Hajj. But one thing that we can take from his prison, when he was introduced to what the form of what Islam was, of his understanding, the NOI, the Nation of Islam, was that what that attribute that he brought from him till his martyrdom was that he was very studious. He was a learner. He was a seeker. There is a quote in reading the autobiography of Malcolm X, and that's a really critical book in understanding how America works, right? That, if when he was going through a car ride, when he was a spokesperson for the Nation of Islam, that if the car ride was more than 15 minutes, he would take out a book and read. What does that mean? That means that with him being and wanting to learn the truth itself, it's always a never-ending process, right? There's the narration of the Prophet ﷺ, right? Seek knowledge from the cradle to the grave. Brother Malcolm was introducing to us that regardless of wherever status you are, keep on learning. There is always a place for learning, regardless. The scholars of the past, they had books and volumes about respecting and acknowledging the acquisition and learning, right? Where people would gather books and they would sell their prized belongings just for the acquisition of knowledge itself, to attain the truth, right? The truth in understanding what the reality of life is and what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us from. Number two, there's a quote from Malcolm himself where he says, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. What does that mean? The man had principles. The man held strong. He was steadfast for what he believed in, to the point where he became a spokesperson for the group that he was affiliated with, the NOI, the Nation of Islam. You see accounts of him going straight, because it's interesting how, we have da'wah, we have lectures and lessons for the Muslim community, while he had the da'wah for the people outside the Muslim community, right? The non-Muslims. He would go in front of a church, and that was his way, right? He would go in front of a church and question people about what they believed in. So for example, there's an account to where he says, he asked a black brother saying, what is the color of your skin? It's black. And what is the color of Jesus. He's white. And so he responds to him saying, then why are you worshipping someone of a white color when you are indeed black yourself? And that was the sentiment of what was happening at that time, right? Of seeing how, the discrimination of the color of the blacks, and seeing how it was motivated towards the creation of NOI, in creating an identity for themselves. And that was something that he held onto, up to becoming a spokesperson, up to becoming someone who was a ferocious speaker in public, giving lectures and so forth. And the third attribute that I can say from just reading through the autobiography of Malcolm X himself, it's interesting because of the attributes of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, you have the attribute of as-sidq, right, which is honesty. You have the attribute of al-amana. You have trustworthiness. You have the attribute of fatana, someone who is intellectual, someone who can respond to others, people's situations and conflicts. And you have baligh, where someone who spread the message, right? And we see all of that stem from Brother Malcolm X, rahimahullah. And the third, going back to that, is that in being super studious, in being a seeker, starting in prison, especially from the dictionary to whatever he could get his hands on, meaning that the acquisition of knowledge was really important. He wanted to understand what is of this situation. How can I make this situation better in the situation of what Black America is going through? Right? He always searched for the truth. And that is one thing that we have to keep in mind, regardless if you've been or you are born into the faith, or you convert and accept the faith of Islam itself. We are always searching for the truth. It's never ending, right? They say that, da'wah, or the spread of Islam, is a never-ending aim, right? We can always improve ourselves to be better. We can always change, as how pre-Malcolm we see versus post-Malcolm after Hajj. And we see how from the ideals of hating the white man, calling it as the white devil and so forth, into understanding that after Hajj, there is the sense of human harmony that we all have when we go to Hajj. And so inshallah we ask Allah to grant us the blessing for Hajj, to experience that sense of Hajj, and to experience that sense of the human togetherness that we have with one another, inshallah. We ask Allah to increase us in wisdom, and to increase us in knowledge, and to increase us in understanding. And we ask Allah for forgiveness for ourselves, for our weaknesses, and we ask Allah to keep us upon this path towards what Brother Malcolm was trying to achieve to, so we can see him as an inspiration towards what is the truth. Allahumma arina al-haqqa haqqa warzuqna ittiba'a wa arina al-batila batila warzuqna ijtinaba. We ask Allah for showing us what is truthful to be the truth, and we seek our following of it. We seek ourselves so that we can follow that truth, and we seek to recognize what is false to be false, and we seek ourselves to avoid that falseness itself. فَاسْتَغْفِرُوا إِنَّهُ هُوَ الْغَفُورُ الرَّحِيمُ. Seek forgiveness in Allah, for Allah is the all-forgiving and the all-merciful. الحمد لله وكفى والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد المصطفى صلى الله عليه وسلم. In going back to the recap of some small minor start of the dialogue of our brother Malcolm X, rahimahullah, may God be pleased with him, we see what the influence of what he had for us and society today. And we see what change, what transformation he got through his different phases in life. From being Malcolm Little, as I said, to Detroit Red, who was a street thief who was slick in the streets, towards going into prison, towards discovering and relearning his roots and understanding a part of Islam from the NOI, the Nation of Islam, towards culminating to the Hajj moment, where with that Hajj moment, the one who seeks for truth, the one who seeks for understanding, for wisdom, we see the change, we see the transformation that he was going through. From what was recognized or was stereotyped as the angry black man to one of the most influential black Muslim thinkers and people and persons in the current age. And so I implore everyone, inshallah, to see that these lessons are just a start towards a dialogue that has gone through across, history of the US and how we as Muslims should go through in the dialogue of society in the US, especially with the presidential elections coming through, and see what we can do in our part as being Muslim, right? As how when Malcolm, even with the change of Islam itself, with him receiving the understanding of Orthodox Islam, we see that transformation in him. Us as being Muslims that have been granted this blessing, we should see a transformation of ourselves, right? Through the added understanding of Islam itself, being more in tune with what being a Muslim is, being in tune with our roots, right? The shajara or sajara, right? The history, being rooted in our beliefs, our core beliefs, and pruding through that, being a beacon of light for everyone around us. I implore you to read the autobiography of Malcolm X. They say, I listened in a lecture once, that there's a reason why that the autobiography of Malcolm X is more in supply in prisons than the Quran itself. Because of the inspiration, because of the situation, because of how it relates to America today, right? And how we have many friends where their fathers from the 60s and 70s, black people, they converted into Islam, they found Islam through the example of Malcolm X, and as hidayah comes, as guidance comes, we always ask Allah in Al-Fatiha for hidayah. Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim, sirat al-ladhina an'amta alayhim ghayr al-maghdubi alayhim wal-dhalin. We all ask for guidance. We ask Allah for understanding. We ask Allah to acknowledge our blessings, that we have in this world, And we ask Allah to forgive ourselves, to forgive our mistakes, to forgive our weaknesses, for we are humans, we are feeble humans, and we ask Allah for forgiveness. And we ask Allah to accept us, to accept our prayers, to accept our du'as. And we ask Allah to keep us rooted with our way of being submitters towards you, O Allah. We ask Allah to help us realize the truth in this world and the truth in the next. And we ask Allah for the best in this world, the best in the hereafter. We ask Allah for His pleasure, and we ask Allah protection from His wrath. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun, wa salamun ala al-mursaleen, walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, wa aqimus salat.
الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
Check. استقيموا واعتدلوا. Strain the lines. Fill in the gaps, inshallah. And keep your focus and concentration in your salah towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Inna salati wa nusuki wa mahyaya wa mamati lillahi rabbil alamin. Allahu Akbar. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. آمين. وإذ ابتلى إبراهيم ربه بكلمات فأتمهن قال إني جاعلك للناس إماما قال ومن ذريتي قال لا ينال عهد الظالمين وإذ جعلنا البيت مثابة للناس وأمنا واتخذوا من مقام إبراهيم مصلى وعهدنا إلى إبراهيم وإسماعيل أن طهرا بيتي للطائفين والعاكفين والركع السجود. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن
مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين وإذ قال إبراهيم رب اجعل هذا بلدا آمنا وارزق أهله من الثمرات من آمن منهم بالله واليوم الآخر قال ومن كفر فأمتعه قليلا ثم أضطره إلى عذاب النار وبئس المصير الله أكبر
الله.
سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام